We'll try you again in just a bit. Ms. Keys-Gamara.
I'm here, sorry.
Oh, you're here. Great. Hi, Mr. Frisch. Ms. Keys-Gamara.
Good morning.
Good morning. Ms. McLaughlin.
Good morning.
Good morning. Ms. Omesh. Good morning. Ms. Omesh, you there with us? I see your mic is on. I can't hear you though.
Hello? Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm here.
There we go. Great. There we go. Thank you. Ms. Pekarsky.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here.
Good morning. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Ms. Tolan.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Great. Okay. Good morning. All right. We have everyone here. Thank you. So this morning, today, from 11 to 1, we have scheduled time to discuss the budget development of our fiscal year 22 budget, which the board is voting on this Thursday evening on February 18th. So today, what we're going to do is time for board discussion. And Ms. Omesh, can you mute, please? Thank you, Ms. Omesh. So we'll have a lot of time to discuss today. What we're going to do is just turn it over to staff for just a brief few minutes to give us an update on budget and as well as some movement in the General Assembly. And then we'll have folks present the amendments that have already been submitted. We'll hear amendments that have not yet been shared yet with the board fully, so ones that are not listed today. Try and get some straw poll feelings of how folks are feeling, and but we will be flexible. This is, our time for work and discussion. So if needs arise, we'll, try and meet those needs as best we can here. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Burden, our Assistant Superintendent for Finance, to take us through the status of our budget questions, which the board has submitted over the last few weeks. Thank you.
Good morning. If we can show the PowerPoint from the school board office, or do you need me to do that?
Yes, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks.
If you can move to the next page. This is the agenda for today. As Ms. Marin said, first we'll do a little budget question update, then state revenue from Michael Malloy, the superintendent's proposed budget summary, and then the Ms. Marin will take everything back over. So next slide. As far as budget questions go right now, we have 61 that have been asked. 41 are still under development, which means if it's a costing issue, then it's in the budget office being developed. If it's program information, then of course it's with the appropriate department. We have 6 that are routing through the approval process right now. We just weren't able to get those done, completed by this morning. And then we have 14 that are posted. We also had a request from Ms. Marin to put a Google Doc out where board members could view questions that were asked, etc. And the link is automatically generated, and so that's why it's lengthy with a string of various characters. But that link is listed on this page and an example of what you'll see when you go to that Google Doc. So hopefully that'll be helpful. Next slide is the state budget update, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Malloy to talk about that.
All right, just getting my video on. Good morning, everyone. So I was asked to provide an update about where Richmond is in terms of the development of their budget. As you remember, the governor proposed amendments at the beginning of session to both the FY21 and primarily FY22 state budgets. At this point, both the House and Senate have adopted their own set of amendments. And just wanted to walk you through some really high-level information about what they are talking about. I will note that as of now, we still do not have the state's revenue sheets. for what exactly each one of these amendments mean, which is a little bit odd. Usually we get those revenue sheets relatively quickly. So we don't have definitive answers on exactly what the overall impact of all of this is, but I can walk you through some of the biggest proposals. In the House has proposed to convert the governor's proposed 2% bonus into the state share of a 5% salary increase for SOQ positions. The House does restore some support position cost of competing funding. That's the extra increment that we get because of the competitive wage market that we work in Planning District 8. That funding had been cut and was being slowly restored over time. The governor's budget last year actually had some restoration, but that got unallotted due to the COVID reductions that were taken during the last special session. And then the House actually does use some of the funding that we received from the federal ESSER 2 funds to supplant a portion of what the governor had proposed in terms of state hold harmless funding. So you will see on our revenue sheets, you will see a reduction in hold harmless funding, and the reason that was taken was by the House's reasoning was because we had received a substantial amount of federal funds. On the Senate side, the Senate does the same thing, just not to the quite same magnitude as the House does on taking the governor's proposed 2% bonus and turns it into a 3% salary increase for SOQ positions. And the reason that I highlight that is because whenever we get a salary increase, the state share for a salary increase, it never quite equates to exactly as much as we would want it to, obviously, because when the state calculates their share for a salary increase, it's only based on SOQ positions. So any jurisdiction that goes above and beyond current SOQ staffing ends up having to cover 100% of a salary increase for positions that lie outside of the SOQ. The Senate does pick up on one of many Virginia Board of Education SOQ recommendations, at least partially. It proposes to fund 3 specialized positions, and they define those as being among social workers, nurses, school psychologists, and actually they do have another category for licensed behavioral analysts, but that's a relatively small number of people in FCPS. So it really does kind of the bulk of it would come down to social workers, nurses, and school psychologists. They're funding 3 specialized positions per 1,000, and that could become 4 positions per 1,000 if revenue contingencies are met. And based on information that just came out in the last couple of days, it's likely that that revenue contingency can be met. So the Senate proposal is somewhere between 3 positions and 4 positions. The Senate doesn't do anything to the hold harmless funding. It leaves the ESSER funds intact, and it leaves the hold harmless funding intact. And one other thing that it does, which doesn't have an immediate impact, but it does propose creating a work group to make recommendations on specific staffing standards for school nurses. They have that discussion every single year in the General Assembly, and I think this year they've decided to get a group together to figure out what the right approach is for school nurses. Now, as you can see, the House and the Senate took kind of different routes to get to where they are. So there are some fairly substantial differences that they're going to have to work out. Those differences are worked out in a conference committee. I think the House conferees have been named. I'm not sure that the Senate conferees have been, but it's typically a group of about 6 or 7 from each chamber that work together. And then we will have the final product by the end of the special session, which is currently scheduled to end Monday, March 1st. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Lee or to Ms. Marin. I'm not sure who has the next slide, but that should cover the state budget from my perspective.
Ms. Burden, you'll go ahead. Thank you.
Yes. This slide reflects the executive summary or the revenue adjustments and the expenditure adjustments shown together on one slide. Again, the superintendent's fiscal 22 budget reflects a modest proposal, almost level with funding from the current year, that focuses on the basic strategic needs of the system, including required adjustments. Those are things like healthcare, utilities that we have to do, recurring adjustments, which were items that were funded with one-time funds in the previous year, and then minimal identified investments. And those investments are, you'll recall, the 50 Esau teachers, a special ed review placeholder, AAP phase 1, those kinds of things, the CIS salary phase in. And all of these expenditures combined, offset by routine expenditure reductions and repurposing, results in only about a $400,000 increase in the budget compared to fiscal 21. The total budget remains at $3.1 billion, but it does require $42.7 million increase in the county transfer request, primarily due to declining revenue in state, federal, and beginning balance or other revenue sources. So I guess, I think you all are aware that, any amendments that are approved without a funding source to be added to the superintendent's proposed and make up the advertised budget will increase the request to the county transfer. At the fiscal forecast, the county indicated that they did not believe that any new revenue was expected to be available. So our county transfer request, whether it's 42.7 or something greater than that, will certainly be something that they have to consider thoughtfully. And then the next page, I think, goes to the amendments, which Ms. Marin will take over.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Malloy and Ms. Burden. So actually, before we have the amendment slide up, can we just leave up the previous slide for purposes of our discussion? Thank you. So we're going to take some time to just go around our board and hear what each of us thinks about where we're at. Because before we launch into talking about adding amendments, which would add to the request that we're making at the Board of Supervisors, let's talk about where people are at with, asking for that additional amount. So really, we're going to try and do this just 2 minutes a person. I know that's not a lot, but we're really struggling with the time today. So if you could please each member, and can I just start with the alphabet and go through just to keep it simple, please? That would just help with facilitation. Well, I'll start with, we'll go alphabet this time, but I'll try and go in a different order. But so, Dr. Anderson, can you kick us off? Again, we're asking each member up to 2 minutes, please, where you are asking for additional funds above what's been reminded of us today. Thank you. And Ms. Cohen will be next. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also have a question regarding the procedure. So may I ask that at the end of my time?
Sure, or now you don't.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. In terms of where we are regarding our ask of the county, I believe that our ask should be reflective of our needs. It may not be what we think we will get, but it has to be indicative of what we need to sustain our operations. So to be super brief, I think that if we need to ask above what is posted on slide 5, then so be it. We have to be true to the needs of this organization and to be sure that we're moving forward in a positive way and that we have the funds to help support that. And I feel very strongly that we should not be so creative that we whittle away at the CARES funds, which are specified for very specific purposes, which is to recoup student loss and to deal with COVID-related issues. And so I really want to be sure that we're being super protective of those funds for those measures. So the long and short of it for me is we need to really be sure that we have a budget that is presented that is reflective of our needs. And if that's above this amount, I will be in support of that. So that's it for me for my thoughts. If I can ask my question and then.
Please do.
Hello?
Yes, please do, Ms. Anderson. Dr. Anderson.
Okay, thank you. I noticed on the schedule that you had straw poll and I love how everything has been set up. My question is this: once we give our feedback regarding all of the amendments, is your thinking that they will all then be embedded in the ask for us to vote upon on Thursday, or we will still need to present them as amendments on Thursday?
I think it's too early to tell in this discussion, Dr. Anderson. I think it's too early to tell in this discussion, so let's see how it evolves. You know, just transparently, I've gotten a lot of feedback in the last day or so over the holiday weekend. You know, people just have questions. So this is the time to kind of figure out where everyone's at with asking. I think another thing to specify, please, so Dr. Anderson, as I was hearing you say, you're comfortable asking for more. If others could also speak to, is there like a limit? Are you okay asking for some things and not others? If people could specify that, please, as you speak, I think that would be helpful for all of us to hear one another. Okay.
Sure. Do you want me to speak to that, or should I just close out my turn?
Sure. Why don't you please? And Ms. Cornell, you are keeping time, right? For the 2 minutes.
This is
Yes,
this is Eileen. I am, yes.
Okay, great. Sure, Dr. Anderson, please continue then.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you, Ms. Marin. Maybe it's my computer, but I just wanted to make sure that I shared that. To answer the question that you just posed, I do think we will have to be quite judicious in terms of what the additional asks are. It cannot be everything, because we also have to be realistic enough to know that we are in we're in a pandemic, and the fiscal forecast is not what it has been in years past. So while I am willing to go and ask for more, it has to be very specific, mission critical areas that make sense during this COVID period. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Cohen. And Ms. Cohen, if you want to let me know if you can hear me okay or not, that would be helpful. Followed by Ms. Corbett Sanders. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I agree. Every once in a while you're breaking up a little bit, but we'll try to keep our mics off.
Okay, great. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. No, I'm grateful to follow that. Mission critical, I think, is the key words here. And so, what I struggle with is that we had a conversation early on when we learned about what the ESSER funds would look more like, that we could go back and use some of that money to look at what operational expenses could be supplanted, and come back and see where that left us with our cost of living increases for all of our staff. And so, I feel very strongly, and I know that's no surprise to my colleagues, that we have got to adjust for cost of living, at least. I mean, it would be wonderful to talk about an actual raise, but right now, our teacher paychecks are less than they were, our teacher and staff, last year. So I feel like if that means that we have to go to the Board of Supervisors and make our case about what that looks like and why we need it when we look at other jurisdictions, I have no problem with doing that. And if we get it, we get it. If we don't, we don't. But I don't agree with the dance that we're trying to play, which is predict how much they might be willing to give us, and then we try to form a budget around that. I agree that we've got to figure out, what does this county need to be successful? And a big piece of that is the schools, and what do the schools need to be successful? So I do feel comfortable in going over the ask and making that case together. So that's definitely my takeaway. It's unclear to me if we did go back and do that comparison of how can we use these extra COVID dollars to decrease operational expenses. I'd be interested to learn more about that process.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cohen. And I am trying to document here what everyone's saying to get some themes going here. And okay, Ms. Corbett Sanders, and then Mr. Annette Fairfax, why don't I put you at the end on the committee? So Ms. Corbett Sanders, and then Mr. Fresh.
Yes, thank you. I do support increasing the ask, but I think we have to increase the ask in a realistic manner and taking into account the good news out of Richmond as well as the ESSER funds, but recognizing that the ESSER funds are only temporary in nature. So the biggest issue, and the one that is before us, is in compensation. For us to continue to be competitive, not only in keeping our staff, but in being able to continue to attract world-class talent, we need to keep our compensation competitive. And so I am very supportive of that. I am very excited about the work that's going on in Richmond in the support services cap. But I think that we need to see how that plays out before we make greater commitments to areas that we do not have funding from Richmond in. For example, we only get 23 cents on a dollar from Richmond, but that's still important. And by the time that we adopt this budget at the end of the year, we will have not only know more about what our county appropriators are going to do, but what the state is going to do, and frankly, what is going to happen at the federal level, where we expect to have increased funds there too. But I would be supportive of increased funding for compensation.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. Mr. Frisch, followed by Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you. Ms. Burden, really quick, are we trying to predict what the county will give us, or is there a lot of hard work that goes into coming up with the figure that the superintendent brings to the board? How can you talk some detail about the conversations that are had with the county before bringing us numbers to consider?
Yes, I mean, essentially we develop our, expenditure budget while we're waiting on information from the state, because the governor, of course, doesn't introduce his budget till second, third week of December. And then we drop that in basically at the last minute. We've already, calculated what our federal funding will be, the beginning balance and other revenue. Those are pretty much known while we're developing the expenditures. And so the county transfer request actually ends up being the difference, is what do we need based on the expenditures that the superintendent supports. We're required to put forward a balanced budget. And so the county transfer ask is the difference between the expenditure level that we believe we need, less the other revenue sources. We do receive formal information from the county during the fiscal forecast, which I think was on November 24th. And at that time, they were not predicting any additional revenue. I think that there have been informal conversations with Mr. Smith and Dr. Brabrand by county, the county executive and other county officials. But none of that is, none of that is final until the county executive proposes his budget on February 23rd. In previous years, we certainly have seen the numbers come up between November and the February introduction of the county executive's budget. I don't know if we'll see that this year or not, but we have certainly seen that in previous years.
I appreciate that. So I would argue that we need to be realistic here. I mean, the budget presented to us by the superintendent is already asking for an additional $40 million. The amendments that I've seen thus far add up to north of $150 million more dollars if we were to approve all of them. And so I think we need to be realistic, and I think we need to make sure that we don't send a false sense of hope to people that something is possible that may not be possible. I'm not going to vote against paying our staff and teachers more. They deserve far more than we can even offer with these amendments that are being proposed. But we need to be clear that there's a very good likelihood if the money was there for everything that we wanted to do, we might be seeing some of the movement, similar movement by county staff to better support their employees. So whatever amendments are put through, I think we need to prioritize them so that we're not sending mixed signals to the county about what our priorities are. If we are approving a host of amendments that require additional funding, we better telegraph to the county which of those things are most important. We will be very lucky to get the $40 million that is additional that we're asking for, let alone any portion of the $150 million more that these various amendments are pushing us towards. I would like to see us focus our attention on the things that are going to make us most successful in the year ahead. That includes social and emotional supports. It includes support for those who have learning loss, and yes, our staff. But we need to be very clear with the county about our priorities when putting those numbers forward. I don't think we also need to be clear with our staff that just because this board approves an amendment to the budget, that doesn't mean that it's going to happen or that the funds are there for it. I think there's a reason why, and the last thing I will say is, where do we stop with these amendments in the future? Do we just ask for everything the school district has ever needed going forward, which is certainly a way of doing things so that people know exactly what the school district requires? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, followed by Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, are you there?
I am for the moment. I apologize. I'm having a terrible difficulty with my connection, so I will be quick. I agree we need to set priorities. This is a really important discussion, so I'm looking forward to hearing my colleagues' positions. I also prioritize our salaries and being able to remain competitive in this area, which I know we have a very high cost of living. So that's going to be important. I will be supporting that particular amendment. I'm not sure about the remaining ones, but in any case, I would like for us to work together for some guidelines, given what the state may provide additional funding. So we may want to set an outside number for raises that may change what we ask for depending on what we receive from the state. And then also we may also want to have some direction for the superintendent with respect to savings for some of the things that we are considering. So looks like I got that in. I'm afraid to keep talking. I'm afraid I may get cut off.
We heard you, so thank you. We got your whole statement there. Ms. McLaughlin, followed by Ms. O'May.
Great, thank you. I'm very happy to be following behind Mr. Frisch and Ms. Keys-Gamarra in particular. I think there's no question that we've got to figure out what are going to be our top budget priorities in asking additional funds. I will say I have more questions than answers right now. Very disappointed that we talk about our partnership with the county, and yet I'm not hearing from school staff how those conversations have gone. I feel like this board is being put once again into a vacuum without sufficient information on where we are, that the state is offering raises on SOQ positions, that this hasn't been discussed with the county executive, and what it means for the Delta for us, and being able to remain competitive, which is going to be crucial. I also have questions from Ms. Burden and saying that we've done some cost savings and repurposing to deal with our budget shortfall and the additional $42.7 million ask on top of what the county is already going to increase our budget. And yet when I look at the numbers, we're pretty much pushing the delta of our state, federal, and current beginning balance shortfalls directly onto the county executive. So I don't see where we're doing any cost savings on our end. I also think that we have to have an important conversation about the fact that we do have employees at all levels of compensation. I want to echo what Ms. Cohen said, that we do want to make sure people are not working for less next year than they currently are this year in their hard work. I know everyone in the division's working hard, but salaries are very different across the spectrum for employees, and people making less than $100,000, very different than making over 100,000, and in some cases 150, 200,000 more. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin, and we'll have more time to talk about questions. Ms. Omesh, followed by Ms. Pekarsky.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Marin, for structuring this in a productive way to allow for a conversation. I'm happy to hear support from colleagues about the needs-based way of looking at our budget. I'm sure you guys recall, I've been speaking to this for some time. I think, one of the things we're gonna have to decide is, okay, so if we're going over our cap, or, what is usually the politically palatable kind of negotiation, diplomatic approach that we take, then are we going to say, all right, then let's put all our needs out there? Are we going to say that we're only going to be selective of some needs since we've made that decision already? And if that's the case, my worry is, as is with all our decisions, we have a sense of what we see to be the needs. Our superintendent brings forward some things, but we have certainly not done an audit or a thorough survey of what our division needs are. So there are things we're not even thinking about. Whether that be, cuts to professional development over many years, whether that be SLIFE students, parent liaisons, interpreter services, staff shortages that are impending and are going to be serious, for us to face, especially when it comes to support staff. So those are pieces that, as just examples of where we may not even be thinking, we don't have a clear sense of what the needs of our system might be. So if we're going to decide, okay, we're going above this, I'm not even sure how we're going to prioritize in a way that is grounded in any set of criteria or is consistent. And then the second bucket of things I want to say is we should also consider maybe phased in plans. So, if we're going to say, all right, we're going to do the needs-based budget, but we don't have everything, or we don't want to ask for this massive number right now, then maybe we want to say, okay, but there are things that are important enough that we should start planning for, because we're going to look at this year by year, and at times we're not going to have the money, or we're not going to prioritize certain things. But there are, for example, staffing ratios we just need to fix in our system. So do we just inch away at that every year in our ask, or to match up to the standard SOQ requirements we're going to be facing? So those are some questions I'd urge my colleagues to think about, but I'm open to an omnibus of just approving everything if we're moving forward above anyway.
Thanks, Ms. Omesh. Ms. Pekarsky, followed by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Marin. I actually, I really am in line with what Mr. Frisch said. I think, we have to be realistic. Can we go over? I think we have to, but our ask has to be realistic, because there are always competing needs. Money is never enough, and the Board of Supervisors is supposed to be our partner on this. So I think if we go in there with what we know is unrealistic, that it will not, I don't think that will be received well. I just don't think that helps us in the long run. I think we absolutely have to prioritize. I think that's part of our job. It's a reality. And my priorities really align with what Mr. Frisch was saying, which was looking at addressing remediation, addressing the very real social, emotional needs that our kids are going to have, not just for the coming year, but for a long time afterwards, our students and staff, quite honestly. Those are priorities that I think we have to address, and also compensation. We have to stay competitive. We cannot fall behind in the region. And, I know the prior board did a lot of work to ensure that we are competitive, and I do not want to lose that and then find ourselves in a very different place in a couple of years. So those are my priorities, and I think a realistic ask, even if it's a little bit over where we are, I think would be appropriate.
Thanks, Ms. Pekarsky. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Great, thank you. So I'm just getting my video turned on. Thank you. I agree with many of my colleagues. I think where we are is a really difficult place because on one hand, I do feel it's important to, be transparent about what our needs are in our system and to be open about it with our public, with the Board of Supervisors, and really have that, deep and honest and open conversation about what are our needs, especially given the realities of COVID and learning loss, remediation, social emotional needs, the trauma that we're all understaffed students. So on the other hand, I also do agree with Mr. Frisch and Ms. Pekarsky that, we have to be realistic, right? And recognize that there are budget limitations out there. So, I'm sure that's not super helpful to say I kind of agree with everybody, but what I'm saying is I think we need to really work to find that balance with being clear of what we need and letting our board supervisor partners know that, and also with finding a balance, being realistic. Similar to Ms. Pekarsky, I think our focus needs to be on social emotional learning, on remediation and learning loss, especially for our populations that already had existing gaps and who our data show those gaps have gotten worse or remained, and compensation for our teachers and staff, especially considering that our neighboring jurisdictions are doing that. And in the era of teacher shortages, we have to remain competitive. So I agree with all of those pieces of it, but I do think that, while it's important to be realistic, it's also important to be sort of open about what the needs of the school system are so we can find that right balance.
Thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Ms. Tolan, followed by Ms. Darnat-Kovacs.
Yes, good morning. So, when I was thinking about the budget and moving forward, I set aside some amendments that I may have put forward myself, just because of the tough budget climate that we're in and trying to be respectful of where we are as a county overall. So I put some of those things aside. And I think at this point, if we would be potentially interested in increasing the ask to the county, but only for the area of staff compensation. I think staff compensation it's a long-term planning issue. I view if we've got other jurisdictions that are implementing raises for employees and we're looking at a potential of a teacher shortage as we move forward out of COVID. But I also agree very much with Karen Corbett-Sanders' remarks. Let's take a very close look at the state monies and state opportunities and look very closely at our own budgeting to see where we can pick up perhaps taking care of some of that compensation. As far as other amendments that we have, I'd like to see how we can potentially deal with some of the big smaller amendments within our own budget priorities and savings. And for the larger ones, I agree that we can use them for planning purposes, to really look at our true needs, but I don't think that at this point in time, I'm interested in including them in the ask to the county. Again, priorities match very closely with other colleagues, social emotional needs, a trauma-informed specialist, perhaps, and certainly learning loss abatement and remediation needs that we have. So I hope that covers it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. Ms. Darnat-Kovacs, and then I'll go.
Thank you, and thank you to my colleagues for helping frame this conversation for the afternoon, so we can kind of see where we are. The words that colleagues have used here: mission critical, realistic. I think that's where I am. For me, mission critical, sitting on this board for as long as I did, and I'll speak to this in my amendment, and obviously the amendment that Laura Jane and I are putting forward is based upon compensation. I think at this point in time, that is my top priority because I have seen the devastating results that not being competitive with surrounding jurisdictions has brought to us in the past. So I think I'm hopeful we can get to a place where we can support that ask. And what does that mean given the changes in the states? I think that's what's going to happen in this conversation, a better understanding of that. Also, we do, and I'm not sure how this can happen, but with so much of an ask being 42 over, 40, maybe 50, 42 over already is the ask, plus another 50 in compensation needs, depending on what our ask is and what the state will end up giving us. That's big. So I would ask, I will be asking Dr. Brabrand and staff at some point to say, how can we address our other mission critical needs, which many of my colleagues have expressed, the learning loss, the remediation needs that are going to happen, and the social and emotional needs that are going to be addressed. So we're going to have to find efficiencies and ways to look at those monies, the CARES monies, if we can, to see how we can do that in addition to ask for compensation.
Thank you, Ms. Darnat Kofax. I'll go ahead and take my turn. So I am in what's become kind of the majority of the camp here, that it is permissible, I think, for us to ask for more, but really the only thing I'm finding that I'm interested in right now is for the compensation for MSA cost of living adjustment. I too want to prioritize, and but I will say I'm bouncing the themes, but that you all have said. So sorry, I'm having trouble separating out my thoughts and the budget thoughts because they're kind of intertwined. But what I want to say is that most of us are speaking strongly in favor of asking for more. The question is, how do we prioritize? That's unclear. Is how are we prioritizing the criteria? You know, what are the criteria for prioritizing our needs? I'm intrigued by the idea of a phased budget that plans for things. I mean, just like FCPS on did this, and increasing the pay of our instructional staff. You know, we heard today about staff formulas, social emotional learning, and remediation. Can we see a budget, perhaps now or in the future, that really phases a multi-year approach to these needs? Regarding you know, other needs, I do see lots of merit in the amendments, but I just think now that I can only, you know, support the compensation adjustment for cost of living. I'd like to just share a little bit more, kind of switching back to budget chair and facilitator hat to further underscore the themes that I tried to pull out. You know, it's an art, not a science. So again, let me just share for my colleagues what it sounds like was being said, and then we'll go and talk about the amendments next. So again, by my count, it seemed that 9 of us said, you know, we are comfortable asking for more if it's judicious, if it's prioritized. Of the 3 that, to me, from what I heard more clearly, were saying that there was more hesitancy there. And then for the teacher compensation, I counted 7 who were in favor of doing something around compensation. So there was also a question more, though, about compensation and pay. I think it was Karen Keith-Gamar who said, you know, what are we doing, you know, within our own universe? Kind of, there's stuff going on at the state, but like, what do we need to do? So with that in mind, let's go ahead and shift. And this was great. We did great. We are on time. We took about a half hour for this. Let's shift over to talking through those amendments. And the first one up is the one from Ms. Darnat Kofax and Ms. Cohen about teacher compensation. So Ms. Darnat Kofax, please, oh, and I see Dr. Brabrand has a question. So let's go ahead and hear that, Dr. Brabrand.
Thanks. Thanks, Ms. Marin, and Ms. Burden and Mr. Malloy, certainly jump in. Just one thing, great conversation. I just wanted to share two nuggets for you as you start to think about your additional amendments. One key question that we're really debating, and you all are debating, is what's the right ask, and trying to base it on, yeah. Can you hear me?
No, I just worried you were cutting in and out a bit, but is anyone else have a problem, or maybe it's just me? I'm in the building as well, but
I'm sorry.
Can anyone else say if they hear Dr. Brabrand clearly?
I can hear him fine.
Yeah, I'll be super quick. Just super quick.
Can you hear? Okay. Then
I'll be super quick. Just one thing, on compensation, you can see the state, it has developed over time. The governor's proposed budget was a bonus. Then the governor stepped out several weeks after the bonus proposal in December and early January and talked about 2% salary and not a bonus. Then you can see the Senate and the House, as Michael Malloy talked about 3 to 5%. So compensation's been evolving. Another nugget for you to know is when we shared, we had our joint meeting with the county in November, their revenue growth was at 0.5%. The state's revenue growth is at 1.2% for their budget. January's revenue from the state came in around 6%. So the real question is, one of the real questions is, what is the revenue growth going to look like locally? Again, at the November meeting, it was only 0.5% revenue growth. That's not much. The state, by the figures we're seeing come in, are much higher. And we really don't know that. I don't have an update on revenue growth from the county executive. So you all are doing, I think, the right thing, having the conversation among yourselves about what your key priorities are. And clearly, I've certainly conveyed to the county executive that if the county has money, additional revenue to pay for compensation for its folks, we certainly want the support for additional revenue to support compensation for our folks. And we are using our ESSER money, one-time money, on some of that student intervention, some of that social emotional learning that you all have referenced. Of course, it's only one-time money. Compensation is reoccurring money, and it's so that's an important consideration as well. Just wanted to share those pieces with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Excuse me. I'll just go ahead, Melly. My amendment with Ms. Cohen, I will read it. Adding 49.1 million to provide a 2% market rate adjustment for all employees and increasing state revenue by 7.7 million to recognize the state share of a one-time 2% payment in FY22 for funded positions included in the governor's introduced budget and increasing the county transfer by 41.5 million. So obviously some things have changed since that amendment was written, and that was maybe 3 days ago. And all of these things happened over the weekend. So I guess what I will do is I will provide for my colleagues, and I know Ms. Cohen and I have reached out to all of you talking about this issue, and I want to express to you why I think adding compensation and MSA is important. But then I guess in the end, Dr. Brabrand, I have to ask of you, our staff, what should the ask look like at this time, given the fact that this was written 3 to 4 days ago, and what was written a week or so ago, but then the changes occurred 3 to 4 days ago. So my colleagues and to the public, prior to FY19 and 20, when FCPS received full funding from the county, FCPS had not received full funding in its budget request prior to that since 1995, nearly 25 years. So much of my tenure spent on the board was cutting, asking for more monies, and showing and trying to keep our teachers on board because many were jumping ship to surrounding counties because we were not competitive. We had made major reductions in that time. Cuts of over $700 million, including 2,649 positions, not all of which are restored yet. For our compensation to reach what prior boards have committed to 95 to 100% of market salaries, we went through a multi-year project which began in 2017 and completed in FY20. Basically with teacher scale adjustments of 40 million, 27 million, 53 million, and 55 million. So as I said, we were in a non-competitive place. the lowest with one other school jurisdiction in the bottom for many, many years, and we worked our way out of it. It's very important that we don't get there again because it's very hard and takes many years to grow out of it. So as you know, each 1% of the salary increase for FCPS is about 25 million, with only about 5 million per percentage as state share, leaving about 20 million per percentage increase to come from local sources. And how is this going to work with the proposed amendments, which the proposed state differences, and we're not going to know that until March 1st. So that's why I think we need staff's guidance to see what the ask is. Just as the most current up-to-date things we have to know where our WABE counterparts are. Alexandria is offering a STEP and an MSA. Arlington, we don't have information on. They will release their budget on 2/25. Falls Church has a STEP and an MSA. Loudon, one of our big competitors in the western part of our county, they're giving a 2.4% as well as a 3.5% MSA, and several other jurisdictions. Montgomery County does not have theirs out yet. So my colleagues, I appreciate this time to give you a little historical perspective why I think a compensation, an MSA is the one amendment that I think is going to be really important to us as we move forward in our ask. And Dr. Brabrand, if you can speak to my question, what should this ask look like right now, considering the changing landscape?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Derenak Koufax. It really is a challenge. The governor put a marker out at 2%, and then the General Assembly, you had the Senate and House come out at 3 and 5. So I think, I mean, again, Mr. Malloy is on the call. I think it's going to come in somewhere between 2% and 5%. Ultimately, where the board wants to go and asking for additional funding for compensation from the county is the exact discussion that you have. But it's certainly, I think, ultimately going to settle somewhere at 2% being the lower end and at 5% being the highest end. Mr. Malloy, would you have anything else you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is with the 3% salary increase proposal and the 5% salary increase proposal, at least the way they're structured right now, they are essentially all or nothing propositions. So if they were to land somewhere between 3 and 5%, if nothing were to change, a 2% salary increase would not actually qualify us for any state matching funding. We actually would have to reach the level of either 3% or 5%. Everything is on the table in terms of discussions in Richmond. That is certainly something that can change. That's something that we've already started to talk to people about. But I just wanted you to be aware that as of this moment, the proposals that are out there are really all or nothing thresholds.
I think that's important for my colleagues to understand. Thank you, Mr. Malloy. Ms. Marin, are we going to go to questions?
Yes, I will. Sorry, I was having some connectivity issues. I think I'm okay. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Keys Gamara, and speakers will keep with the 2-minute time limit as much as possible in this session. Thank you.
So having heard from Mr. Malloy in the earlier conversation, I guess my question is, we can always roll back from what we ask, but we can't increase our ask to the county. And so I would suggest that we increase our ask for a 3% rather than a 2%. And then if things change where we get flexibility, obviously we can address that. But that is why I am wondering to the maker of the motion if you'd be amenable to increasing the ask by 25 million and making it 3%.
Ms. Corbett Sanders, thank you. I think that will be part of the discussion, absolutely, given where we are. We did not have time to reach out to everyone as that is part of the conversation and for everybody to understand that. So I'm anxious to hear what my colleagues say, but as Mr. Malloy stated, at this point, it's an all or nothing proposal, and all we can go with is this moment in time. So I think that almost has to be our ask if the board is willing to go that way.
So I would like to amend your amendment with a motion to increase it to 3% versus 2% if possible. Thank you.
Okay, so go ahead, Mr. Fairfax. Was that you?
Ms. Corbett Sanders, rather, I would ask, could we just have that as a point of discussion rather than doing the formal amendment, amending the amendment? Could we have that as a point of discussion, or do you want to?
I'm flexible. I'm flexible, Mr. Annette Fairfax. As you know, I raised the compensation questions on the very first discussion of this budget. So I just want to make sure that we continue to be competitive. And the manner in which we achieve it, it doesn't really matter to me as long as we get to where we need to be. And I think that 3% would be appropriate to ensure that we can lock in those funds.
Well, let's please stick to something someone had recommended once, which is to allow a first round of comments before motions are presented to adjust the motions so that everyone has had a chance to weigh in. So,
Ms. Marin, yes, and I would ask though if colleagues can speak to that point because I'm amenable to that amendment.
Okay, so so where we're at is people speaking to the original amendment, the suggestion of the 3% amendment, but so Ms. Corbett-Sanders, do you need to withdraw your amendment or now do we need to vote it? Because
I'm willing to let the conversation go and then we can decide how to address it. But that is what I'm advocating for, is to increase it to 3%.
Got it. Okay, great. And I know Ms. Burden does want to add some information, but do you want to jump in now, Ms. Burden, or wait until all board members have spoken?
Yeah, you just should know that it would not increase the ask 25 million. It would be about 20 million because the revenue assumption would go up as well.
Thank you. That makes it even easier. Appreciate it.
Okay, great. So we'll continue with Ms. Keys-Gamarra and Ms. McLaughlin. Again, motion and an idea of adjusting it up. Thank you.
So I apologize. I was going in and out and I didn't hear what Ms. Burton said, but I was hoping to build in a contingency. I agree with what Ms. Corbett Sanders said, but at this point, we don't know what the state will require. So I'm wondering if we need to identify a certain percentage above, so a final outcome of what that raise would be. So that if, for example, they say 2% or 3% or whatever it is, we still would have built into our budget sort of the flexibility to be able to move depending on what the state is saying. So Ms. Burden, I'm wondering how we might be able to build in such a contingency, if you could address that.
I mean, all of it is a contingency to some degree, but each 1% is, nearly 25 million, and our revenue, our state revenue, of course, would go up as well, and we will recognize that in the budget, even though we don't know yet what exactly our state revenue compensation state share would be. So, if you did more than 3%, again, it would come up, the county ask would come up 20 million for each percentage with, a little less than 5 million in state revenue for each percent.
I understand that. So we don't know whether the state will allow, at this point, I think Mr. Malloy said the 2% would fall below the threshold where we activated the state fund. So what I'm looking for is language that would allow us to benefit from what the state is offering, even if that language changes. So Mr. Malloy, can you give me some clarification? And again, I apologize. I've gone in and out, I would say 5 times just since Ms. Karen Corbett-Sanders started talking.
Yeah, of course. Right now, the way the 3% raise proposal and the 5% raise proposal are structured from the state is they're essentially all or nothing propositions. You have to certify to the state that you've provided a raise of that level in order to qualify for the state matching funds. You can't give a 2% raise and just take part of the money. They're not drawn that way right now. As I was saying, it's entirely possible that as part of the budget conversation that they have in Richmond and as part of the negotiation with the conferees that could change. But as of this moment, it is 3% or no state revenue or 5% or no state revenue on those 2 amendments.
So I guess my question would be, is there a way that we could write our language, irrespective of which of those the state chooses, that we have a certain percentage above, whether it be 1% above that to not to exceed a certain amount, so that irrespective of what the state does, we're still asking for an amount above that, and therefore we would qualify for the state funding?
Is staff answering that question, or Ms. Keys-Gamarra, are you just stating that?
Well, I'm throwing, I guess I'm putting that out there for our board members to consider, because at this point, we don't know what the state will say. But I think I heard unanimity between our board members that we did want to have a compensation package. And so I know we may have to work on this between now and Thursday, and I did mention this to Ms. Darren Kofax. But I'm hoping that we can come up with contingency language that will prevent us from being excluded depending on what the state says. So I guess that's kind of where I'm going. I would agree with the 3%. However, based on what Mr. Malloy just said, they could decide 5%. So we may want to have some discussions either today, or I'm not sure what that language could be, to cover both contingencies.
Okay, understood, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. I just want to mention, I'm trying hard here to balance that. I know we're trying to talk in detail about this budget and this amendment, and we've got other amendments. So members, if you can please focus, your comments or questions real specifically in ways that help you make a decision, or for the benefit of your colleagues, that would be great. And Ms. Keys-Gamarra, thank you for the suggestion to figure out if there may need to be more work done between now and Thursday. We didn't decide everything here, but again, we have a majority that are interested in compensation. So knowing that, it's 12:04 now, if maybe we can aim for like by 12:20 to move on to the next set of amendments. And then what we'll do is the presenters will present the amendments, and then let's go around just down the line again, and people can speak to the totality. I'll try and make the time work here. So, bear with me. Okay, Ms. McLaughlin and then Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. First, I'll say that I really felt that I heard all 12 of us talk about support and interest in raises for teachers, and also very strong concern about how we make sure that all of our employees are not going to find themselves working for less money in the coming year due to inflationary and other costs. So I appreciate, Ms. Marin, you were trying to grab where we all were, but I did want to make clear, I didn't think I heard 7 to 9. I heard stronger than that. I think the concern is just how do we get there? And I think what's bothersome and worrisome to me, Dr. Brabrand and Ms. Burden, I raised this in my comments earlier, and this really goes to how we tackle this proposal from Ms. Darren Kofax and Ms. Cohen. Are you sharing with this board that the county government leadership is not telling us anything about projected revenue changes since November that you've asked them and they've simply said, we're not telling you? Because if the state has updated us that it's gone from 1.2 to 6%, why wouldn't the county leadership tell us something similar? So I would like clarity on that first before I speak further.
Well, I can't speak to the county, but the state numbers that Dr. Brabrand provided, I believe, reflect the current year and their revenue, because the governor's office does a monthly reassessment of revenue. But I could be wrong. Michael may know more.
Yeah, and
well,
I
want to stay focused on local, to be honest, given the time frame. So if people want to speak about what the county will or won't tell us about its revenue projections, that's helpful.
No, and Ms. McLaughlin, this is Mr. Smith. I guess I have my video on. I'm used to going back and forth here. In our conversations with the county, they've held true to their reduced revenue scenario. So the things that they've been sharing with us is that we shouldn't be expecting revenue increases in the coming year. And so we've moved forward with the budget based on those conversations, and we'll certainly see what happens once the budget comes out on the 23rd. And it's important for us to know moving forward with the budget that the advertised budget is our particular ask, and then we will have time between the advertised and the approved based on our revenue that comes in to make adjustments based on those priorities. And so I'm helping to also frame that in a larger sense for the board as they're thinking about what the overall ask is going to be, and then at some point having to decide how to prioritize and what the actual budget will be.
Okay, I guess I'm still struggling because obviously the county government is monitoring its revenue, and when they prepare it on February 23rd, it's going to be based on that growth, what they're going to do for their employees as well. And Dr. Brabrand, thank you for making note that we absolutely want our county partners to recognize that any and all compensation increases that are being provided to county employees would certainly be translated and provided for on our side. So we have but I have still some questions about this, but I am supportive of some change here that allows us to take advantage of state funds as well as look to employee compensation in some form.
Thank you. Ms. Cohen, and then Ms. Toll, I'm not sure if you had your hand raised and lowered it or not, but you would be next if so. Ms. Cohen.
I think it is very difficult for people to understand when they hear that the state is going to be giving teachers a 3% raise or a 5% raise. I think we just need to take a time out for a second and have Michael walk through that is not irrespective. That doesn't happen outside of what we do, and it doesn't happen if we don't match it. So we're talking about a zero increase in compensation, while other places in the state are able to take advantage of this matching system. But does somebody mind just walking that through for the folks who are watching at home, if anybody is spending a rainy Tuesday doing this, why it's important that we figure out how to match or that we lose the money?
Yeah, Ms. Cohen, I'm happy to do that. The way the state structures when the state says that they're going to provide funding for a salary increase, it's important to understand that they're providing the state share of an incentive to provide a salary increase. There actually is specific language in the amendment that says it's not a mandate for localities to provide a salary increase, but it's intended as incentive matching funds for localities who do meet the threshold to be able to provide the salary increase. So it isn't, the headline might say state provides 5% salary, but that's not the mechanics of exactly how it works.
Thank you. I think that's so important because I think that people don't recognize that other systems then who are able to match will wind up having their teachers see a significant increase, whereas larger systems in particular, like ours, if we're not able to come up with the money for that match, then our teachers wind up not getting anything. And I think that's really important because that's not clear in the conversations that are coming through from the state, that when it feels like the state is giving some sort of teacher salary increase, and that is not accurate. It is a match. So, I think we're caught in this weird scenario of not knowing the specific answers, which I recognize is problematic in terms of thinking about this amendment or an amendment to the amendment. I'm hopeful we're going to know more, obviously, before Thursday. But, I think that both Ms. Darina Koufax and myself would ask for some flexibility as we learn more in the next couple of days about where we're headed here. And this may come down to the wire in figuring out what that number is. And I recognize that's a big pot, asking you to be patient with.
Thanks, Ms. Cohen. Oh, Mr. Smith, do you want to add something?
Yes, I would also add that match is different depending on the locality. And so when we've seen our neighboring jurisdictions come out with increases for their staff, a lot of that has been based on local increases in revenue. So again, we have a smaller share of the pie, as Ms. Corbett-Sanders spoke about earlier, than other jurisdictions. And so they may be getting more of their monies from the state to fund those increases, but that also is incumbent upon what their localities can provide for revenue increases as well.
Thank you. Just doing a time check, I'd like to give it back over to Ms. Darina Koufax to tie up this portion of the conversation. I think, the purpose was to get a sense of where people were at. We have a sense, it's clear that more work will be done in the next 2 days, but it's known that there will be a proposed amendment on this item, and then we can move forward with the other amendments. So Ms. Darina Koufax.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to let my colleagues understand what this amendment could look like with proposed dollars. This is from Ms. Burden, meaning which Ms. Corbett-Sanders suggested, the 3%. So we would be adding at this point $73.7 million, providing a 2% market rate adjustment. State revenue would increase from that 7.7 million to 13.4 million to recognize the state's, won't even say to recognize the state's 3% salary increase. And the increase to the county transfer, which is the bottom line, you're all wondering, that would be 60.3 million. So that would give us state revenue. That's what the monies would look like. And obviously, it's a bigger ask, but a bigger input from state's revenue. And as Ms. Cohen said, I think because we're hearing from all of you that there is a desire for some type of compensation, we will be reaching out to all of you and over the next few days and working with staff to see what is our best path forward, given what Ms. Corbett-Sanders put on the table.
Okay, thank you. Great. This is really productive. Let's go ahead and shift gears. I know there's some more questions still.
Can I just add a point of clarification, Ms. Marin?
Ms. Corbett-Sanders, we did lay out the path here, and we want to make sure that Dr. Anderson, Ms. Omesh, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, and Ms. Picarsi also get to make their case for their amendments today before they go forth. So it's really best to please switch lanes and get over to putting the floor over to Ms. Dr. Anderson.
Ms. Marin, I just want to clarify something because I don't think it was made clear. So a point of clarification, it will take 2 seconds.
I've said no, but you seem intent on going forward, so okay.
So when we add to our budget ask, even if with what is being suggested, that money would be locked in within our flexibility to then give raises irrespective of what happens at the state level. So when we ask for the increased money, if things change at the state, we still end up with money in our budget. That's all I wanted to.
Yeah, but that's not a point of clarification about our process. That's an additional comment about the topic. So let's go ahead, please, and move on. And it'll be great to continue working on this, as we can over the next 2 days as things continue to shift, give us new information. Dr. Anderson, so you'll have 3 minutes, please, to talk about your 2 amendments, and then we're going to go immediately to Ms. Omesh to present her amendments, and then we'll go immediately to Ms. Eismar-Heiser. I don't know if you and Ms. Pekarsky want to divvy up that time, but each of your sets of amendments. So Dr. Anderson, Ms. Omesh, Ms. Eismar-Heiser-Pekarsky, each get 3 minutes. So go ahead, Dr. Anderson. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarification, I am not sure I see the amendments from Ms. Eismar-Heiser and Ms. Pekarsky on this PowerPoint. So I don't know if there's an updated one somewhere, but it would be great.
Submitted this morning, so we'll see if that can be done. If not,
super, thank you.
Thank you.
I will be super quick because I think the amendments that I have put forward don't require significant discussion because one of them has come up over and over again in the same vein of Ms. Dana Koufax regarding teachers' compensation and how behind this division has been in making sure that there's parity. I think it's the same thing regarding the first motion that I have, which is to increase the elementary school principal pay to middle school principal pay. I understand that this has been I don't want to say a promise, but this has been a commitment for the past 15 years that has not come to fruition. And last year, I believe we were close, but then our budget was slashed significantly. So that also ended up on the cutting floor. So I wanted to bring this back up for revisiting, because in the same vein that we are losing teachers to other jurisdictions, the same is happening to our principals. I see that here in Mason District quite a lot. And so I wanted to be sure we could address that, particularly, and also a second piece, which I'll be honest, did not come to my attention until after I submitted the first component for the middle school parity pay, is that the same conversation's been had about the elementary school, the elementary assistant principals. And so this is an ask of $700 million. And then my second ask, the second ask that I'm sharing with Ms. Omesh is also $700 million. And I think we may have some flexibility here in terms of if it's not this main budget, I would like some consideration.
Dr. Anderson, excuse me, just a correction. You're saying $700 million. I believe you mean $700,000.
Oh, 700, did I say 700 million?
You did twice. So.
No, not thank you. 700,000 for each. It is not 700 million, folks. I apologize for that. That would be just way out of our reach. But very quickly, the second amendment, which is to provide some additional support to the schools that fell out of Title I status. There are 6 of these schools. There's Lawton Station, Mason Crest, Rose Hill, Lake Ann, Springfield Estates, and Daniels Run that fall all over Fairfax. Hunter Mill, Mount Vernon, Lee District has 2, Mason District has 1, and 1 is Fairfax. These schools were grandfathered for Title I supports because they fell out of the Title I status the previous school year. So during this COVID year, this was their grandfathering year, which frankly, I don't think they had the opportunity to take full advantage of. And also knowing that these Title I schools that are already at the cusp will only be increased in terms of the needs and the challenges that their students present when they come back into the school division next fall on a full-time basis. I wanted for the board to provide consideration to extend that grandfathering an additional year to those 6 schools to the tune of $700,000, not $700 million. Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Omesh, with the remainder of the time, I will invite either one of you to speak to these 2 amendments that we're working on together.
No, I'd rather hear where our colleagues are and save time. I think you did a fine job.
Likewise, it was a good capture of it. Thank you.
Okay, so that's it for me. Thank you, Ms. Marin.
Thank you very much. So now we will move on to Ms. Omesh. And I believe you have some slides to share, Ms. Omesh.
Yeah, sorry. So we're not moving into discussion, just to clarify.
Just to be sure that each of you gets the chance to make your cases. So.
No, I appreciate that. So I believe folks are able to see, are you able to see this right now?
Yes, and folks can zoom in if able.
Okay. Okay, thanks. This is the budget question that I had submitted in December after our conversation about trying to do something that is needs-based. I understand this is overwhelming and daunting. I mean, if we take a look at some of our ratios, right, we're still well above the best practice ratios for many of these positions. And so in trying to prioritize, if we're deciding at one point we're going to project all our needs and perhaps want to phase in certain things rather than wait for eternity to have certain changes that we know our school system needs, this is an opportunity to do some of that. But what I will say is, even amongst all of the various pieces I presented, I would focus on number one, a student mental health package. Dr. Rayburn, I'd like you to speak to this at the end of my remarks, but I know that we're looking at standards of quality requirements that are changing from the Department of Education and potentially the General Assembly. So getting ahead of those is certainly of benefit, but given especially the crisis of what our students have been going through, in particular, social workers, psychologists, and counselors, getting those to best practice ratios, while of course costly, would be about 30 million. And that would be phasing it in 2 years. So it's not even getting us to where we could be this year. So that's one component. And if we were to expand that to a student physical and mental health package, and including nurses, which are also severely understaffed, but they have a different ratio situation. So if you want to refer back to the question, you'll also see it in some of the remarks on the first page. That would add it to a total of about 45 million as a package to provide, support for student physical and mental health. The other piece I want to break down is looking at the ratio of Esau teachers. It remains absurdly high, 1 to 44. And of course, that's an average. I mean, it varies obviously for the level and the needs. But staff from instructional services had recommended 150 positions. Dr. Brabrand folded in 50. So that is something we can bring back to the original staff recommendation for about 10 million. So that if we're going to look at true needs, and that still only brings us to 37, 1 to 37. So it's still severely lacking, but moving in a direction. And my amendment brings us to that, to be able to phase into the proper ratio within the 10 years if we commit to that. So that's the second piece. The third piece is really support for student academics. Obviously with COVID, we have an understanding that there are gaps. We're concerned about everything that's going on and what we anticipate. For about 40 million, we can bring down over several years the ratios for math and reading specialists to add supports for our schools, as well as class size to allow for that more focused instruction. To this point, as you guys know, I mean, we have classes. I was just speaking to Nathan, actually, who shared with me that in one of his classes, they have 30 kids and the teacher doesn't even know the name of certain kids. And I mean, as we move into more dire circumstances, I think it's going to be extremely important to have that. So you can think of my pieces I'm presenting as in 3 buckets, really. One being that student health package, the other being just making up for what staff have already recommended in terms of the ESOL supports, given the glaring ratios. And then the third being student academic support. It's based on, what national associations have to say about best practices. Of course, I'm amenable to any adjustments in that, but I'd like to direct any other time to Dr. Brabrand, if you could speak to the standards of quality component that's with some of this. And then Dr. Williams, if you can speak to equity considerations related to all of this and how we're thinking about the budget altogether.
Well, thanks, Ms. Omesh. I'm going to have Mr. Malloy add a little bit, but the reality is the Board of Education prescribed new SOQ standards well over a year ago. And it's now about the General Assembly funding those standards. Those standards are going to bring some of the social emotional supports that this school board has talked about for some time. And as you said, Ms. Omesh, we've started in the budget. Already in this budget, We have some additional social workers and counselors that we did at the end of last year that we are putting in now permanently in the budget. We put in some additional English language staffing. But we know when the General Assembly ultimately funds this, just like compensation, we're still responsible for a tremendous amount of the cost for those additional positions. So it's really a matter of when the General Assembly is going to make these new SOQs a requirement. And when it is, the bill is going to come due for us to be able to follow that state requirement. Mr. Malloy, am I capturing that correctly? Anything else you'd add or provide to the board for what Ms. Sargent is sharing?
Just in terms of kind of clarifying, so the State Board of Education, as you've said, has prescribed a set of standards of quality. They don't go into effect, however, until the General Assembly funds them. Just as a kind of a point of comparison to what you're talking about here, Ms. Omesh, the State Board's recommendations, I think, is spot on with the 1 to 250 for counselors. In terms of what's funded, the governor's proposed budget, I believe, had funded a ratio of 1 to 325, and neither the House nor the Senate proposals did anything to that. So that funding would be in the budget, but that would take the ratio to 1 to 325 for counselors. For the other positions, and this is kind of a compilation of nurses plus social workers plus psychologists, is they all would fall under the bucket that the Board of Education has recommended for 4 positions per 1,000 students, and any ratio among those positions. The shorthand, I think, to conceptualize that is essentially that ends up working out to 1 per 1,000 for psychologists, 1 per 1,000 for social workers, and then 2 per 1,000 or 1 per 500 for nurses. So that's where the State Board's proposal is for those positions. In terms of what the General Assembly is discussing, the House didn't have anything, but the Senate did propose funding to go to 3 positions per 1,000, not all the way to 4 positions per 1,000. Now, they did have a contingency saying that if revenues were available, they might try to bump it to 4 per 1,000. But as of right now, the only thing on the table, and this is only as part of the Senate's proposal, is 3 positions per 1,000, which again would be spread amongst nurses, psychologists, and social workers. And one last addition is that the Senate is proposing to create a work group to look at nursing ratios on their own. So right now considered, or they're included in that proposal for the 3 positions per 1,000. But if that proposal makes it into the budget, there would be a work group that would be convened in the off session, and then they would come back next year potentially with a specific ratio for school nurses, which may or may not affect the 3 or 4 positions per 1,000. But that's where, what the Board of Education has proposed and kind of where the General Assembly is on funding each piece of those.
Thank you, Mr. Malloy. And Dr. Williams, I don't know if,
yeah,
there we go.
I'm here. Good morning. And to your question, Ms. Omesh, I heard you really talking about 3 different buckets, right? Health concerns, supports for students for whom English isn't the first language, and then generally speaking, academic recovery, and what does that look like in an ongoing way? And so if I could talk about those things from the equity perspective, from the 30,000-foot lens, the system has made some decisions and recommendations about how we respond to that in the budget as presented. But I think the issue that you are elevating is the question of scope and scale and depth, right? And so what does it mean for us to have made a request for X number of positions dealing with the fiscal realities? We reduce that. And so what will that look like for those students upon return to school and in an ongoing way as we seek to deal with all of the ways in which students have been challenged and communities have been challenged, right? And so I think what is going to be really important for us is to have a process where we are able to center the most vulnerable students with full knowledge, to the extent that one ever has full knowledge, of scope and scale of impact and complexity, right, of circumstances with which they and the communities that they are situated in are contending with, and make those decisions from that space to ensure that we're not doing necessary but insufficient kinds of engagements. And so, you know, again, I get concerned when we talk about requests at one level and we then have realities that are far less than those requests and what that actually means in practice for those students. And I think that's in part the situation we find ourselves in now. But what I would recommend in moving forward is that we have a process where we begin by centering those students and make our decisions from the inception of the budgets with them at the center out. So hopefully that speaks to your concern.
Thank you. And I know my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Omesh. And next we have the amendments submitted by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser and Ms. Pekarsky this morning. I'm not sure if our clerks were able to, oh, there they are. Thank you so much to our clerks, Ms. Milberg and Ms. Cornell. So Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, I'm not sure if everyone's seeing it zoomed in or if it's just me, but okay, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, you want to go ahead and step in, and however you and Ms. Pekarsky would like to divvy up the 3 minutes, it's all yours.
Thank you. Actually, this is the first one I'm bringing with calendars, and I just want to clarify, we were not asking to increase the county transfer. We were just asking for the superintendent to find space in the budget to fund a 1.0 neurodiversity specialist. So I just wanted to clarify that this isn't quite correct, but
so it shouldn't have a letter B. It also has B.
It should not have a letter B. Yes, it should not have a letter B on here. And I apologize for sending them just this morning. We were waiting for some information before we could send it out. So, and I sent along with an email this morning a very lengthy sort of explanation about what a neurodiversity specialist is and the reason for one. You know, I just want to start by saying it's a very small ask. It is only $100,000. It's one specialist position, and the purpose of this position is several. First, I just wanted to sort of lay out the background, is that our gaps for our students with disabilities in both academic achievement, in achieving a standard diploma versus an applied studies diploma, which severely limits their access to college and post-secondary opportunities, as well as in discipline and disruptive behavior referrals and absenteeism. Those gaps are some of the worst amongst our subgroups in our county, and have only kind of gotten worse under COVID. So, you know, the purpose of a neurodiversity specialist and neurodiversity education, it's really an emerging trend that focuses on student strengths and positive teacher expectations and can improve educational and academic outcomes. And really, it would allow us to be a leader, Fairfax County be a leader in special education services. You know, as we had some of the purpose of this neurodiversity specialist would be multiple. First, at our AAP report that we got, in addition to the many of the other recommendations that I see in the budget, recommended we have a twice exceptional coordinator, which is a recommendation that is not in our budget. In my conversations with Dr. Boyd and Mike Bloom, I initially brought up the 2E coordinator, and our thought was that a neurodiversity specialist could do some of that work, but also help support other inclusive opportunities, such as better access for students with disabilities to CTE, fine arts, and electives. When our students get to secondary, often they get inclusion opportunities reduced due to the need for intervention classes that are offered as electives, as opposed to embedded more in core instruction. And a neurodiversity specialist could also help streamline and redefine curriculum at the secondary level to allow for inclusive opportunities with a strengths-focused lens. They could also liaison with the equity office to ensure a culture of neurodiversity, again, in strengths-focused and including the lived norms of children with disabilities as part of the lived norms of our school culture. So there's quite a few roles that are needed that a neurodiversity specialist could do. I will say that FCPS does not have a single position dedicated to creating and supporting students with inclusive settings. While we have many staff members, curriculum resource teachers, behavior intervention teachers who do work to support students in the general education setting, there's no one staff member whose sole job is to support those inclusive settings. And research shows that inclusive settings improve outcomes for all students, those with and without disabilities. And again, FCPS used to employ 25 inclusion schools resource teachers, but we currently do not have any. Many of those become behavior intervention teachers. So this one specialist at a very small cost, without asking for an additional county transfer in a tight budget year, would really allow us not to look at what other school systems are doing and then do that, but to be a leader in what we're doing, address some of the gaps and needs already identified by experts in our AAP report, and address some of the needs at secondary to allow for more inclusive opportunities. So I'll stop and see if we still the candidates. Oh, I told Ms. Sanders I used up her whole time there. So I'm so sorry I didn't do that.
And Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, if that was the whole 3 minutes, yeah, I thought that you and Ms. Pekarsky I thought you were talking about both your amendments at the same time. So we really do want to make sure that all the amendments are heard. So can you speak to like a minute to your next amendment? And are those all the amendments that we have to speak to today, Ms. Goldberg?
I'm happy to see if Ms. Pekarsky wants to speak to the other one, or I'm happy to speak to it as well, whichever she prefers, since I spoke to this one.
Ms. Mulberger, are those all of the amendments that have been submitted for today?
That is actually a question I'm going to defer to Ms. Burden on.
Okay, Ms. Burden, are there any other amendments you know of?
Yes, that's it. That's the last one.
Okay, well then how about we hear the last amendment, and then we'll have just enough time for everyone to get 2 minutes to go around on each of these amendments. So can we hear RSH 22-2, please, and have that up on the screen? And whether Ms. Sizemore-Heiser or Ms. Pekarsky want to speak to it.
I can just very quickly, it's self-explanatory. Talk to some of you. This is something that we've all been talking about throughout the year. This is a request for a trauma-informed specialist that will be focused solely on this job. You know, Dr. Brabrand has talked about this. I think every single one of my colleagues has talked about this on this board, and the focus that we need to have on the social emotional needs of our students going forward. Much of this work has been done through our social workers and our social work department, but it has not been in one focused wheelhouse. And I think now more than ever, if there was ever a time that we need to have a dedicated position to do this work, it is now during COVID and post-COVID. I will say that we are behind, I think, in this area. Other school districts have entire departments focused on this and dedicated staff, multiple staff members. I think this is a very small ask for a one full-time position that can have great impact going forward. This is in addition to compensation. When we're talking about our student needs, this is at the top of my list, coupled with compensation. So I think this could go a very long way. And I don't want to take too much time, but we have more information that was sent to all of you this morning, and I'm happy to talk offline as well.
And thank you. And just to be clear, although the slide is showing the one that Ms. Sizemore-Heiser just spoke to, Ms. Pekarsky just spoke to a 1.0 position for a trauma specialist or social emotional learning. What are you calling it?
It's a trauma-informed.
Trauma-informed. Okay, great. So folks, we have about 20 minutes. Enough time. Oh, well, then we wanted to do a straw poll. Okay, well.
Ms. Marin? I'm sorry, this is Mrs. Cohen. I had a point of order question about 22-2. Is it direct the superintendent to find reductions, or is that an additional spending request?
It is to find reductions. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. Well, let me just check. Is anyone else proposing another new amendment unknown to the board at this time? If so, can you please speak up? Like, there are some hands raised, but is there anyone proposing, going once, going twice? Okay, great. Let's do this, please. This seems to be the most fairest way to do things. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order. Everyone can speak to these 3 amendments or whatever else they feel they need to say. Please indicate where you stand on each of these amendments. That will be, in lieu of a straight up poll, which will take us a lot of time. So, and then we will conclude hopefully just at 1 or just a few minutes over. So again, we're going to go reverse alphabetical. So that's Ms. Tolan. Speak to your support of Dr. Anderson's. I'm going to just say the main motion makers' names: Dr. Anderson's, Ms. Leish's, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser's. And I don't know if there's a way to show all of that, or maybe why don't we just take the slides off because it's confusing for now. That's what we're going to go with. Okay, so Ms. Tolan. And each person, excuse me, I'm talking, and each person would get 2 minutes for that. Was that Ms. McLaughlin? Did you have a point of order?
I do have a point of order. I have already communicated with the chair and vice chair of the board that I do think and would like to suggest to this board that we postpone the public engagement committee discussion this afternoon. I do not think it's mission critical compared to a $3 billion budget that we're trying to figure out tens of millions more in compensation.
It's not a point of order though for this.
My point is I would like for that to be considered before we adjourn.
Well then, I would like us to proceed please with the plan laid out. And if you want to bring a motion after that, but right now I'd like to use this time as was designed by the budget committee to go ahead and get as much input as we can. So, and let's please go ahead, go through. If you can speak to your feeling about each amendment briefly. If we need to do a poll, we can try and do that quickly, but it would be most expeditious to try and speak to that. So, Ms. Tolan, and followed by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Thank you, please. Thank you, Ms. Mulber.
Okay, so quickly looking at the various amendments suggested, I do support the neurodiversity specialist and the trauma-informed specialist, and would like to see us look at our current budget to see where we could possibly fit that in. For the a couple of amendments with from Dr. Anderson, although I agree that these are priority areas and needed, I need more information about how we could potentially pay for those. I'm not comfortable asking the county for the additional funding for that. And then similarly, with Ms. I applaud the long-term view and a really close look at the best practices and ideal situations, but it can't at this point in time go above what staff has already recommended, based on even our the 42 million in increase ask that we're asking from the county. We do cover some of those areas minimally, I admit, but not really willing at this point to go above that ask. I just wanted to make a comment as well. I understand, with Ms. Darren Fairfax's amendment that we'll be discussing this over the next couple of days and making changes to the motions. But I really hope to make our budget discussion on Thursday evening as efficient as possible, and hope that we won't be seeing any additional amendments coming in after this evening to sort of, bolster what we've talked about before, this 48 hours for a major decision, that we won't have additional motions coming in. But again, fully understand that we need to watch what's happening with the state and maybe making modifications to the compensation amendment that we talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. Next, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, followed by Ms. Pekarsky.
Thank you. I would say I fall similar to my colleague, Ms. Tolan, on here. I would like to look at our compensation and hopefully get more information as the state goes forward, but that is the high priority for me in terms of our teacher and staff compensation. I fully support Dr. Anderson in terms of the instructional coaches for the Title I. In terms of the elementary principal pay, I think that's important as part of our compensation for teachers. So I support it. I kind of want to see how it all plays out in terms of all of our budget asks, but I do think it's important it's a longstanding need for elementary principal pay parity, and our principals have been working very hard, as have our teachers. So I'm inclined to support Dr. Anderson's two motions. I think they're very important, especially holding our Title I schools harmless. The ones who were just Title I schools, let them grandfathered in one more year, considering what's happened with COVID. I very much appreciate Ms. Omesh's amendments and her thoughts of trying to truly be needs-based and move towards best practices. I'm curious what the state will do around some of these positions for nurses and psychologists and counselors. And I don't want to dismiss behavioral intervention therapists. I just want to put a plug out there that our ABA coaches have not received additional funding for the last 10 years. So just something to keep in mind. We do, I know OSCI has traded for additional positions, but they haven't received additional funding for 10 years. So I do want to not dismiss that piece of it too. So but I just don't think we can add that much more, to the budget in this year. I think we have to really prioritize. I do hope my colleagues will support the very small ask for a neurodiversity specialist, allows to be a leader and do some of the 2E work that is so important, especially in light of restraint and seclusion as well, and working with our the culture of our schools to help support those students and reduce the behavioral issues and needs. And of course, I do support a trauma-informed specialist. I think that covers all of them, Ms. Marin, and let me know if I missed one, but thank you for the time to share my thoughts.
Great, thank you. Ms. Pekarsky, then Ms. Omesh.
Okay, thank you. Just quickly, and I've shared with Ms. Sizemore Heiser that I have some concerns with the neurodiversity specialists when we're in the middle of a study of our special education program. But I think, the needs she brings up, and we've had some lengthy conversations, I will probably be inclined to support that, especially if we can find a way to fund that position without increasing the ask. Dr. Anderson, I do have questions about the instructional coaches, and I guess I would love to hear maybe what your conversations have been with leadership staff to the need, and I guess I just need some more details as how this fits in with falling out of a Title I status, and what happened last year, I guess, with this money, or this year during the grandfathering and phase. I would just like some more details on that.
Thank you, Ms. Pekarsky. Ms. Omesh, and then Ms. McLaughlin.
Was Ms. Corbett Sanders wasn't before me? Just want to make sure.
I'm going reverse alphabetical.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So I think, I'm in alignment with a lot of what my colleagues said. I did want to just offer, just regarding the behavioral specialist, I think Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, you brought up a good point. And it is included in my budget question as I projected for consideration. I mean, these really the reality, folks, is if we were to get ourselves to a place where we are doing best by kids, we're talking, near $1 billion. But in any case, I heard, folks in the beginning of our meeting today speak to the importance of academics and mental health as priorities moving in. I would welcome and I would ask of my colleagues to suggest solutions or alternatives or modifications, perhaps. I'm certainly amenable to what we can do to serve our kids, and I've tried to phase that out over many years. So to be realistic with what we have. At this point, any of the asks, if we take them as packages, would be less than our compensation package, which we're putting forward. I think it behooves us for our students, from the mental health side and also the academics. So I just put that out there. I would be open to the idea of some kind of omnibus if we are at the end of this meeting at some level of consensus and understanding that these are priorities we value moving forward. But other than that, I wouldn't want to stand against any of these because, again, the reality is that a real needs-based budget is in the hundreds of millions, if not in the billions. So that's just something I would offer, and really do urge my colleagues to offer up something, because we can't walk away from this not having really robustly addressed the academic and mental health needs of our kids this year. And I just remind everyone, I know there was a comment made about staff recommendations, but the original staff recommendations were consistent with some of the things I brought forward. It's just that cuts were made once we decided we're not asking beyond the needs. But now that we are asking beyond the needs, we have the opportunity to think about the other severe needs that we kind of put back for that reason. So I just remind everyone of that. But that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Omish. Ms. McLaughlin, please, your stance on the amendments.
Thank you. Ms. Amish, I want to first say that I appreciate your detailed proposal. Someone who's advocated for a very long time for many of these positions. I do share your desire to see us close the service needs that we have. But given we're looking at a $400 million price tag alone, I don't feel that this coming Thursday, this is the place where we add this in. Instead, I would say that your proposal, your amendment could actually be an excellent follow-on motion from this board to the superintendent and communicating out to all of our stakeholders our commitment and desire that as we not only refine this existing budget, but more importantly, go to build FY23, that this board is very intent in looking at what other board members have said. How do we take our operating funds of $3 billion and make sure we are focusing on mission critical services and positions? Since we're reminded again and again that almost 90% of this $3 billion budget is people. So what positions are we funding and where is our focus? To the other two smaller requests, Ms. Marin, if I understand, it's just the two positions from Ms. Pekarsky and Ms. Seismer-Heiser.
And then as well, Dr. Anderson's amendments on Title I, hold harmless and principal parity pay.
Okay, well, I've been a strong advocate on elementary school principal parity pay, and in fact put forward prior amendments and motions on that for many years. So the language from Ms. or Dr. Anderson are ones that I'm carefully considering support for, as well as the other two positions from our colleagues. I think they're de minimis in their impact on our overall ask. But I will restate for my colleagues that I would like at the conclusion of this portion of today's agenda that we consider a motion to revise the agenda and continue this conversation. I think we need to sort out and solve what we want to put on the table for Thursday related to employee compensation. And I don't see that the citizen participation discussion is as mission critical as that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Keys-Kamara, followed by Mr. Frisch.
My position hasn't changed. I think the focus is compensation. That's where I'd like to focus my discussion. I think my colleagues mentioned a number of important things, but given the budget climate, I think that I would have to limit my priorities to the compensation issue.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Kamara. You're finished?
I am. Thank you.
You get the prize for shortest comments, Ms. Keys-Kamara. Way to go. Mr. Frisch, followed by Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Thank you. I guess I'll start with the neurodiversity and trauma-informed positions, generally supportive, and appreciate that we're asking for those positions to be funded with current monies. On Dr. Anderson's amendments, I support principal pay parity, but in the realm of the things that we've been presented with in terms of amendments, I would not consider that to be among the top priorities of what's currently proposed. I do support the Title I changes to hold harmless. Ms. Omesh's amendments, I think it's right for us to begin having the conversation around exactly what it is that we need. I particularly think that we should be focused on the social, emotional, and academic supports that she's outlined in her amendments, although I think we may want to consider the way that we phase it in so that we can actually get funding for it from the supervisors. Ms. Derenak-Koufax's amendment on pay, I support any way we can to get more compensation for our teachers and staff. But again, I would be remiss if I did not say that it is extremely important to me that we prioritize these amendments so that we're not just going to the supervisors with a giant request on top of what we're already getting for them to make sense of. I think that if we approve, let's say we approve 3 amendments, we better tell them this is the most important, this is the next most important, and this is the third most important. so they know what our priorities are in that regard. You know, I think it's important that we're realistic in this conversation, and that we're not just, you know, building up hopes to watch them dash based on these conversations. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Frisch. Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. And I'm glad to follow Mr. Frisch, because it is really important to have shared priorities between the two boards. We are one Fairfax, and that shared priority is something that this board and the Board of Supervisors has focused on for the past 4 years, has been on the compensation piece. And so I don't think that walking away from that at this point is a good thing to do. I think we need to lean in and ensure that we continue to be competitive in our compensation. So I fully support Ms. Derenak Koufax's work on this, with the caveat that I'd like to see it increase slightly to 3%. I also support Dr. Anderson's 2 amendments, because that is also about competitive compensation. Regarding the others, I really appreciate the approach taken by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. We talked about this extensively before we put forth this amendment, because what it says is this is a priority, but we need to be more strategic and actually look at what we are currently funding that we no longer need to fund. And this provides that opportunity to the superintendent for her 2 amendments. Regarding the instructional coaches, I want to remind people that the reason that these schools are no longer Title I is not because their poverty has diminished, but rather that the threshold for continuing to be a Title I school has been increased. So I fully support continuing to provide the much needed supports that are important for those communities. Finally, Ms. Omesh's comprehensive amendments. Well done, Ms. Omesh, but I think they actually go to the underlying issue that we continue to have, which was addressed in the 2017 follow-on motion, which I will ask my new board members to reaffirm this year, which is that we need to align our budget with our strategic priorities and our strategic plan, because that is exactly what Ms. Omesh's amendments are really structured towards. And so I would just urge, unfortunately, this is with only 2 days, doing that strategic alignment makes it difficult. So I will look forward to having a more in-depth discussion of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen, and then Dr. Anderson.
Thank you. One question I had for Dr. Anderson, and again, I appreciate going after Ms. Corbett Sanders, because I want folks to know that the federal threshold for Title I school is 40% free and reduced meal status. Here in Fairfax County, because we get so little money from the federal government to be able to do it, we're at 65%. So a school has to have at least 65% of its students qualify for free and reduced meals, which we know does not even really get to the real poverty that we talk about in our schools. So I appreciate her flagging that, because that's huge. And I think people don't realize that we technically would have many more Title I schools if we were able to use the federal threshold. So to that end, I wondered, in the world of grandfathering, when we talk about this COVID money, the ESSER funds, is there a way to use the ESSER funds? I guess this is to Ms. Burden, for that Title I, for the piece that Dr. Anderson's looking for?
I don't think so, but we would need to check for allowable usage. I mean, I think it's something that we're already doing. So to argue that it's related to COVID, you can certainly add positions to assist related to COVID. But since we already had those positions, I think you'd be hard pressed to make the claim that they were related to COVID.
Okay. That being the case, I intend to support that unless we can find out some lovely creative way to fund it otherwise. With the elementary principal and AP, and I do want to say, again, this is my go back to COVID funds. we still have APs who worked 12 months, but were paid for 11 months that we were supposed to pay them an additional month when they came in to help us figure out what in the heck to do and how to make it work in the fall. So I just want to flag that again for everybody that we still haven't figured that piece out. And so I do hear, I hear you, Dr. Anderson. I obviously am a big fan of figuring out how to pay our folks what they're worth and making sure that we keep amazing people here. And so I'm in big support of those compensation pieces. To Ms. Sizemore Heiser, I totally hear you. I think it's awesome. Let's figure out how to do it within the confines of the budget. And, you know, I would say to Ms. Omesh, you know, I think this is a different way of looking at the budget. And I think you're absolutely not wrong. My request would be, let's figure out where we wind up on the state level with all of these bills floating around about changing SOQs, about nurses, about counselors, figure out where our match is and how we make this work with the state. And I know that is not fall neatly into the body of this proper budget proposal. So, so I'm inclined to say yes, but not yet, which is not super helpful to you right now. But I think that this is one of those bigger long-term, it's like, how do we eat an elephant a piece, you know, piece by piece, piece at a time. So let's work together to figure out how to do that going forward. I think this big chunk in this year is not gonna happen, but thank you, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ms. Bowen. Dr. Anderson and then Ms. Derenak-Kofax.
Okay, I'll try to be very quick. One of the things that I do want to say for my colleagues who've had questions regarding the two items that I propose, I plan on reaching out to you to be sure we can discuss these issues a little bit more in depth. And thank you to both Ms. Corbett-Sanders and Ms. Cohen for flagging certain areas that I failed to present initially during my two amendment. So thank you for that very much. I do want to say I am in full support of the trauma-informed specialist. And I also wonder if we're not able to do this through an additional ask. It speaks to mental health. I think there's a space for us to consider CARES funds for that. Ms. Burden, can you confirm that that would be allowable?
Sorry, I keep freezing. What was your question?
Can you share whether or not it would be allowable to fund the trauma-informed specialist from CARES funds? Just to give us some flexibility here.
Yes, I think that would be an allowable use. You know, currently the superintendent and the leadership team are reviewing, you know, the plans for ESSER 2. But, you know, that's certainly something I think that would be allowable.
Thank you. And also in speaking with Ms. White, who I know probably spoke with all of us regarding her advocacy for this position, she also said this is a position that should work its way out of a job. So, I mean, 2 years is short, but at least it gives us space. And if we are really confined with what we receive from the Board of Supervisors. Similarly to the neurodiversity, I am highly in support of this, but I want to hear a little bit more, kind of in alignment with what Ms. Pekarsky said. How does this fit within the broader picture of our special education audit and study? So I'd like to hear more from the makers of that motion. Same thing, I think it's been said, and I will save us the time with Ms. Omesh's motions. I think it's a great place to start an initial conversation for next year. I think we're too far down this rabbit hole a little bit with this budget cycle, knowing that it's not the most optimistic climate that we've ever had. I would love to see this be a follow-on motion for us to really frame how we take a look at the next year's budget for FY23. I think, did I cover all of them, Ms. Marion? I feel like I've lost one. Oh, I think Ms. Derenak-Kofax, as I shared with you on the phone, I'm very much in support of that. I do have some questions if we're raising it from 2 to 3 for the 61.3, but I'm definitely in support as it was originally presented. I think I've covered them all.
That's it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Staranek Kofax, and then myself, and that should put us right about at 1:10, and then we'll take that lunch break. So, or we might have a motion, but.
Yes. Going through, Dr. Anderson, and many of us who have asked for this pay parity for many years, I would like to explore with you the possibilities, if you haven't already asked this, to propose this as part of the budget the way the neurodiversity specialist is being proposed, as asking the superintendent to find existing funds to make this happen. I'm not sure if you did that, so I would like to consider that and to talk about that as we prior to Thursday. I am in support of the providing instructional coaches, and I am questioning. I think our Title I monies, our Title I percentage is at 55, but I will have to figure that out.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. It is 55. Just I didn't want to interrupt all the flow. 55 is the new.
Yeah, we moved from 40 to 55, which in itself was quite a big jump for many of us. Ms. Omesh, I thank you for your work on this, and I look forward to having further conversations with you on this, as these are definitely have been goals of our system and long-term goals. I am going to also go with my colleague Karen Corbett-Sanders, who said some of these things are in our strategic plan. We need to make sure these align with what we have all talked about for so many years. But at this point in time, with the big numbers that we're talking about in compensation, I don't see how we could move forward on this at this time. But again, good thoughts and ways to move forward as we go forward and in years to come when budget cycles are better. The neurodiversity specialist, I do have questions on this. I would like a little bit more information on that, and also the trauma-informed specialist, the way you're asking for both of these positions to find funding. I think that's good. See if we could find CARES funding, but I do want a little bit more conversation about neurodiversity specialists so I understand it better. Thank you.
Thank you. So I support Dr. Anderson's Title I amendment. Lake Ann and Hunter Mill has suffered that, as well as Forest Edge, which didn't make the cut. So I support that. That's something I've been trying to figure out for a while now. Principal parity, I do support it, but it's just, I would like to see if there is an option to pull that from within our own budget, but I do worry about us losing our very talented and dedicated principals and APs. So I'm more inclined to support it than not. Abrar, I welcome your statement about what the budget should aspire to, and I think it could really inform what the next steps for budget committee work is, that maybe it re-envisions, what the budget does and a multi-year plan, so kind of like a strategic plan. So rather than support that right now, I support the effort of really planning on how to make the changes that you're talking about in terms of meeting kids' needs. The neurodiversity specialist, I love that idea, but I do want to wait until we hear what the special education audit reveals, as well as what the funding is going to have, what's going to happen with the funding with the advanced academic placement placeholder. There's some connections there, and so whether funding could come from that straight out right now or in the future, that's something I'm not quite sure about. But I do support the trauma-informed specialists. It would be great if we could use ESSER funds for that, CARES Act funds, but that will be seen. So I will keep that short, bank the 30 seconds. Ms. McLaughlin, if you'd like to make a motion, please go ahead. Otherwise, we will adjourn for lunch.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. I would like to make the motion. I appreciate that the board was able to put this budget work session into place. So my motion is that we postpone the public engagement afternoon work session on citizen participation, and that to another time for the chair and vice chair, and allow for this board to continue its conversation surrounding the most significant portion of this discussion, which is how do we determine what will be the best amendment language on employee compensation.
Okay, so in summary, the motion is to postpone the PEC conversation and instead continue about budget. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? Okay, Ms. Derenak has seconded. So Ms. McLaughlin, do you want to speak to your motion?
Yes, I realize I started to speak to it. I simply feel that we've got some great conversation from earlier today about the 2%, the 3%, what do we know or presume is happening around the region. But if we're going to position ourselves for Thursday night, I think it would be helpful for this board, along with staff, to provide more information to us and the public about what we do know is happening in Northern Virginia and how we then communicate Thursday night in our actions, both in language and then also in speaking to the public and the board of supervisors why we're going to put forward additional funding requests. I just feel that we're not clear with each other yet on how exactly we want to flesh this out, using state matching funds, but also then do we look at SOQ state funds for raises, but then other employees, do we consider the COLA, the MRA, so that we again make sure that everyone working for FCPS isn't going to find themselves earning less next year if we don't do something. So I just don't feel our conversation has been fulsome, and I really hope that we can dedicate our time this afternoon to continuing this budget.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Colfax, if you could please succinctly speak to your second. Thank you.
Sure. I welcome the opportunity to hear directly from my colleagues. As I said, Laura Jane and I will reach out to you, but I think if we could have just a bit more time to talk about that, given the numbers that I set out there at my closing statements, I think that would be helpful. I think if we had that opportunity to do that now, we might be able to just have a consensus by the end of the end of this extended work session to have a real understanding, and the public have an understanding of where we're going on that. So I appreciate the opportunity to extend the conversation for that reason.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other hands raised, we'll go ahead and take a vote on the motion. All those in favor of the motion to postpone PEC and talk about budget instead, please raise your hand. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, are you raising your hand to vote or to speak? Okay, all those, can we just take the vote, please? I've already called for the vote. Those in favor of the motion to postpone PEC and speak about budget instead, please raise your hand. Okay, we have Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Ms. Cohen, Ms. Derenak Colfax, Ms. Tolan, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, and Ms. Pekarsky, and Mr. Frisch, and Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. So that is 9. Can you please lower your hands?
Ms. Marin, I'm also raising my hand, but I was in the presenter section.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Omesh. Thank you, counting Ms. Omesh. Okay, and then those, you can lower your hand, Ms. McLaughlin. Those opposed? And those abstaining? I guess I'll abstain. So my question is this now. We worked really hard to format this to be a productive conversation, and now we have two hours open of just free time to speak about the budget. So we're going to take a break, and now we're 15 minutes behind. We had ended just about on time, but the vote has put us behind. So now we have an hour and a half to talk about the budget. So I'm not really sure,
Ms. Marin, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
I think that since we have the vote to continue the conversation, it is now 1:15. We could break for lunch and then we could try to work out when we come back. We'll try in the next 30 minutes to figure out what the next, until 3 o'clock, what that's going to look like. That would be what I propose.
I guess that's what's going to have to happen, but I'm really, I'm just thrown off here because we had spent so much time over this holiday weekend preparing for this. And I personally have to go take care of my children now for the next half hour, so I'm not available. This is the danger of changing the agendas on the spot.
Sure.
So,
I definitely understand.
Ms. Derenak-Kofax,
I'm sorry.
Ms. Derenak-Kofax, perhaps you can work to figure out the next segment, since you also seconded the motion, and you could frame it up.
Ms. Marin, may I be recognized? I've had my hand up.
Sure, Ms. Seidel.
I was just going to add that, I'm happy to, since I was going to be doing the next section with this, to work with Ms. Derenak-Kofax or Dr. Anderson or whatever it is. But I think, there's possible time to at least do some of the budget work. And if there's time left over, we can then move on to at least introducing the citizen participation topic, even if we have to finish it at a later date. So I don't think it necessarily is a all or nothing in terms of just the budget versus just the citizen participation. We can just continue this and see where it goes from there.
So can I suggest then that Ms. Derenak-Kofax take the reins of that? And I would also suggest that Ms. McLaughlin, can you write down your specific questions or areas of focus that you'd like to see the board give input on, since you did make the motion? That would really help in guiding the discussion and keeping us on point. We did a great job today, and I would hate to see us, deter from that. So, okay.
Can we adjourn for lunch while we kind of work with this behind the scenes? I think everybody knows who the players are. So let's just not hold everybody else hostage and at least start with that break.
I'm getting to it. So it's 1:17 now, and let's adjourn till 1:45, please, when Ms. Derenak will reconvene us. Thank you.